Welcome everybody. Welcome to another session on English Core meant for class 12. This video session is being prepared for the students of Queens Valley School. In this video session, we are going to discuss the text Lost Spring. The writer of the text is Anis Jung, and the textbook that you need to refer to for this particular text is Flamingo. Now, I would like to remind you that it is highly recommended that you read the text at least twice before watching this video session, and also grab hold of your textbook, a notebook, and a pen before watching. I am hoping that you have your questions ready, which I hope to resolve through this video session. First and foremost, I would like to draw your attention to the title of the text. The title of the text says Lost Spring, Stories of Stolen Childhood. If we analyze the title and the subtitle closely, we would find that the author is trying to draw some kind of a connection between the season cycle and phases of human life. If we look at the title, we see that spring is lost. Now, spring as a season may be connected with regeneration, rejuvenation of spirits, and the possibilities of growth. But that possibility is lost. And if you look at the subtitle, then we are looking at stories of stolen childhood, which means that childhood is also in some manner lost or has been stolen from children. Now let us try to understand this a little bit more. Look at the last four lines of about the author lines. The following is an excerpt from her book titled Lost Spring, Stories of Stolen Childhood. Here she analyzes the grinding poverty and traditions which condemn these children to a life of exploitation. Let us go over these keywords one by one. Poverty may be defined as lack of access to public resources, including food, clothing, housing, medical care, necessary social services, and the right to social security. The stories that we have in class 12 syllabus analyze the lives of two children who are suffering from abject or grinding or crushing poverty. On top of it, there are traditions. Now, a tradition may be defined as a set of long established customs or beliefs which are transmitted from generation to generation. They are a kind of a convention which cannot be challenged or probably should not be challenged as it is taught to the children. But what we see is that it is a cumulative effect of grinding poverty and traditions that condemns these children to a life of exploitation. Now, what is exploitation? Exploitation is treating somebody unfairly in order to benefit from their work. Now, how is it that the society is benefiting out of the work done by or carried out by such children? For this, we would have to see how they become an important part in running the setup, that is, the society. Now, how exactly are these children exploited? It is by denying them the opportunities to education, awareness, health, sanitation, basically opportunities to grow. And when we deny them all of these opportunities, we are effectively taking away human rights from them. This particular text, which was published in 2005, offers itself for a comparative learning. You would have to notice and enlist the similarities and differences as you read the stories of two children called Sahib and Mukesh. Before we begin with the discussion, I would like to tell you one important thing, that the page numbers given in this particular video session all correspond to the PDF file uploaded on the school website. The PDF file may also be downloaded from the NCERT website. Now let's meet the protagonist for the first text. The first text is titled Sometimes I Find a Rupee in the Garbage. Let us try to explore the protagonist through the questions asked by the author. Let us look at the first question. Why do you do this? For your convenience, I have highlighted these questions. The first question is, why do you do this? Now, it is through the answer given for every question that we would get to learn something about the life of Sahib, also about him as a person. Let's look at the answer for this. Sahib says, I have nothing else to do. Why is it that he has nothing else to do? He's a little child. It is because he had left his home long ago. Set amidst the green fields of Dhaka, his home is not even a distant memory. There were many storms that swept away their fields and homes, his mother tells him. That is why they left, looking for gold in the big city where he now lives. Now, this particular paragraph actually makes it very clear that Sahib is a migrant. He has moved from his native land to a big city, and we would know what that big city refers to. He has moved to a big city in search of gold. Now, here, gold need not be taken literally, it is actually occupation which can make him earn some money in order to support livelihood. And it is this big city which is now his home. Also, please notice why is it that the author asks this particular question. Look at the first line. I ask Sahib, whom I encounter every morning scrounging for gold in the garbage dumps of my neighborhood. This tells us that Sahib is engaged in the occupation of rag picking. Please notice that I say occupation and not profession. Who is a rag picker? A rag picker is a person who rummages through garbage and salvages reusable or recyclable materials thrown away by others to sell or for their personal consumption. Now, here in this particular text, we are looking at a person who is engaged in an unorganized sector. We are looking at an out of school child who is engaged in rag picking, and he finds himself at the bottom of the labor market. Just for you to know, waste picking or rag picking actually ranks lowest in the hierarchy of urban informal occupations. The people engaged in such occupations have no social security benefits or a recognized employer employee relationship. And of course, they are poor. Look at the next question. Go to school. This is rather an advice. The author suggests that Sahib should go to school. But then look at the answer. There is no school in my neighborhood. When they build one, I will go. This tells us the disparity in the availability of resources. Not everybody has access to school. And then look at the next question. If I start a school, will you come? And look at the mood of the author as well. I ask, half joking. Is it possible, you tell me, is it possible for the author to build a school? But then look at Sahib's response. He is smiling broadly and says yes. But see how the author is in for a shock. A few days later, I see him running up to me and he asks, is your school ready? Look at how the author had given him a false hope. If you go back to the previous section, as she asks him to go to school, she also realizes immediately how hollow the advice might sound, but she still gives him a false hope of building a school. And she, at this particular statement made by Sahib, feels embarrassed at having made a promise that was not meant. But look at the realization. Promises like mine abound in every corner of his bleak world, which is to say that the lives of people like Sahib are full of such kind of hollow promises. There are promises made by politicians, leaders, or the civic society, but those promises are never fulfilled. Look at the next question. The author asks him his name, and Sahib responds, Sahib-e Alam, he announces, but then he does not know what it means. If he knew its meaning, which is Lord of the Universe, he would have a hard time believing it. Why? Because he really does not live a life like that. He is not the Lord of the Universe. Unaware of what his name represents, he roams the streets with his friends, an army of barefoot boys who appear like morning birds. Look at that imagery, morning birds, and disappear at noon. Over the months, I have come to recognize each of them. Why is it that they appear only in the morning? Because they belong to the class of rag pickers, and most of the work associated with that particular occupation has to be carried out right in the morning. It is in the morning that these people appear with their plastic bags and pick rag and then sell it, or probably keep a portion of it for themselves and then just disappear. They appear again the next morning. Look at the next question. Why aren't you wearing chappals? Now look at the kind of occupation Sahib is employed in. He is into an occupation which requires him to wear shoes, protective gear, masks, or other such things. But he is not even wearing chappals. And look at the author's observation. Traveling across the country, I have seen children walking barefoot in cities on village roads. It is not lack of money, but a tradition to stay barefoot is one explanation. I wonder if this is only an excuse to explain away a perpetual state of poverty. Now, of course, we are not aware of a tradition where people have to stay barefoot. But here, as the author notices and analyzes, she finds that probably it is converted into a tradition because they do not have enough resources to meet their requirements. It is actually used as an excuse to explain away a perpetual state of poverty. It is because they do not or will never have resources that their elders have explained not wearing chappals as a tradition, and traditions cannot be challenged. They just have to be accepted. So you see, it is a sorry state of affairs. We have a child who is a migrant who works in garbage dumps. He doesn't know where a school is. He cannot go to one. He does not even know the meaning of his name, and he does not get to wear proper footwear. And the reason? Tradition and poverty. Tradition is the reason to explain poverty. It is at this point that the narrator is reminded of a story a man from Udupi once told her. That story is reflective of the status in the community of ragpickers with respect to social and economic status. It actually stands in contrast with the community of priests, where a considerable improvement in social status is visible. If you read the next paragraph, you would find that happening. Let us see where this acquaintance of the narrator or the author with Sahib leads her. Let's look at life in Simapuri. If you turn to page number 15, you would find this long paragraph which discusses how Sahib and people like him moved from Bangladesh to Delhi back in 1971. My acquaintance with the barefoot ragpickers leads me to Simapuri, a place on the periphery of Delhi, yet miles away from it metaphorically. Now, what does this mean? Simapuri is in Delhi geographically, but as far as development is concerned, as far as access to resources is concerned, it is far away from the metropolitan national capital region, Delhi. We are told that those who live here came from Bangladesh back in 1971, and Sahib's family is among them. Simapuri was then a wilderness. It still is, but it is no longer empty. It was a wasteland even then, and it is a wasteland in 2005 as well, the year in which this particular text, Lost Spring, was published. But the author says that it is no longer empty, which is that it is now populated. In structures of mud with roofs of tin and tarpaulin, devoid of sewage, drainage, or running water, live 10,000 ragpickers. They have lived here for more than 30 years without an identity, without permits, but with ration cards that get their names on voters' lists and enable them to buy grain. Please notice how these people lack basic facilities, but they are still a prominent vote bank. Food for them is more important because it is meant for survival. Look at this line. Food is more important for survival than an identity. They are not recognized as people. They have ration cards, yes, but nothing else. They say if at the end of the day we can feed our families and go to bed without an aching stomach, we would rather live here than in the fields that gave us no grain. So, the major reason why they moved from their native place to this particular big city is that they had thought that big city would provide them with opportunities. And you would know that that is the major reason for such a large population of the urban poor. It is because people think that big cities can accommodate a large number of people that they leave their places and migrate. They say that wherever they find food, they pitch their tents that become transit homes. So they have no permanent place to live. Also, children grow up in them, becoming partners in survival, which means that children are employed at a very young age to support the earning of livelihood. And survival in Simapuri means rag picking. Simapuri is at the outskirts of Delhi. It is a major hub for rag pickers. They form the unorganized or informal sector. Through the years, it has acquired the proportions of a fine art. Through the years, they have learned or gained expertise in this particular occupation. And to them, garbage is gold, which means that it is their only means of living. It is through garbage that they fulfill their most basic needs. It is their daily bread, a roof over their heads, even if it is a leaking roof. Now, leaking roof is actually symbolic of the loopholes in the system. They have something, but that something is not enough. It is inadequate. Now, even as garbage to them is gold for the people living there, for a child, it is even more. It is not limited to survival opportunities. So, what does it mean for a child? Let's look at that perspective. The rag pickers live in deplorable conditions. We have seen how there is lack of identity, lack of resources, lack of motivation in everything. But if you look at the child, then for the children, it is wrapped in wonder. For the elders, it is a means of survival. Why? Because when children sometimes find a rupee or even a 10 rupee note in the garbage heap, they cannot stop scrounging. There is hope of finding more. It seems that for children, garbage has a meaning different from what it means to their parents. For the children, it means thrill, enthusiasm, motivation. They have still not understood the realities of life. Their elders may have become accustomed to it, but for the children, it is something new, and they do not really realize what they are missing out as they are employed in this particular occupation. Let's look at Sahib one more time. One winter morning, the author found Sahib standing by the fenced gate of the neighborhood club, watching two young men dressed in white playing tennis. And Sahib says that he likes the game. And he also admits that he goes inside when no one is around. He admits that the gatekeeper lets him use the swing as well. Now look at the dream of Sahib. He wants to go inside when no one is around. He wants to probably play the game as well. And the gatekeeper is kind enough to let him use the swing. But he is content to watch it standing behind the fence because probably he understands that it is out of his league, that it is out of his reach. Sahib is wearing tennis shoes that look strange over his discolored shirt and shorts. And he says, "Someone gave them to me." He says in a manner of an explanation, which is to say that he has not probably stolen it. The fact that they are discarded shoes of some rich boy who perhaps refused to wear them because of a hole in one of them does not bother him. He does not get bothered by the fact that the shoes he is wearing are not really his. They are actually some kind of a discarded material. Because for one who has walked barefoot, even shoes with a hole is a dream come true. People like Sahib do not have a choice. They do not have resources to fulfill their wishes or their dreams. They make do with whatever they find in garbage. And this morning, Sahib is on his way to the milk booth. In his hand is a steel canister. And he says, "I now work in a tea stall down the road." And he points in the distance. He says that he is paid 800 rupees in all his meals. When the narrator asks whether he likes his job, his face drops. The narrator can observe that he has lost the carefree look that was associated with his face when he ran like a morning bird with his friends looking for gold in garbage. The steel canister seems heavier than the plastic bag he would carry so lightly over his shoulder. The bag was his. The canister belongs to the man who owns the tea shop. Sahib is no longer his own master. Please notice how Sahib had to take up a job at the tea stall in order to support his family. He actually succumbs to the grim realities of survival and subsistent living. His act of joining the tea stall as a child laborer may be interpreted as loss of freedom and childhood innocence. Now, as I say it, I do not mean to say that rag picking is a much sought after profession and working at a tea stall is comparatively somewhat lower. What I am trying to point out is that working at this tea stall is actually symbolic of ensuring that he would never be able to fulfill his dreams of going to the school or playing tennis. I say this because it is also a step away from the wonder and amazement associated with childhood. Now, Sahib is no longer his own master. He has lost his carefree look and accepted a fixed income as he is forced into labor early in life only to support his family and earn his livelihood in a better way. This was Sahib's story, a life of social, economic, and political marginalization. Let's now look at Mukesh's story. It is interesting to note that while Sahib is no longer his own master, Mukesh insists on being his own master. He wants to be a motor mechanic. Now, this is not again a very sought after kind of a profession. And the author asks if he knows anything about cars. And he says, I will learn to drive a car. The author still makes a comment. She says, his dream looms like a mirage amidst the dust of streets that fill his town Firozabad, famous for its bangles. Firozabad, we know, is a town in Uttar Pradesh and it is famous for its bangle making industries. Every other family in Firozabad is engaged in bangle making. It is the center of India's glass blowing industry where families have spent generations working around furnaces, welding glass, making bangles for all the women in the land, it seems. Now, even if that is the case, what is the problem in being a motor mechanic? The problem lies in the stigma of caste, in tradition, in poverty, in lack of education and awareness, and a connection with karma or destiny. That is what the problem is that the protagonist is going to face. We have a glimpse of life in Firozabad. Mukesh's family is among the several people who live in Firozabad, but none of them know that it is illegal for children like him to work in the glass furnaces with high temperatures in dingy cells without air and light. That the law, if enforced, could get him and all those 20,000 children out of the hot furnaces where they slog their daylight hours, often losing the brightness of their eyes. Look at the completely inhuman and unacceptable working conditions here. The people do not even know the law. There are 20,000 children working near hot furnaces. And it is not only the children who are the victims, even the elders are victims. They are as unaware, as illiterate as the children are. And the major fallout, the loss of brightness of their eyes. And the living conditions are no better. Look at how they have been described. We walk down stinking lanes choked with garbage, past homes that remain hovels with crumbling walls, wobbly doors, no windows, crowded with families of humans and animals coexisting in a primeval state. Absolutely degenerative. Not only are the working conditions ill lit and ill ventilated, so are their homes. And Mukesh stops at the door of one such house, bangs a wobbly iron door with his foot, and pushes it open. We enter a half built shack. They are not properly constructed, and yet we have several families living with young children in those shanties. As the author becomes more acquainted with the world of Mukesh, she meets several people and analyzes their predicaments. The first person is Mukesh's sister in law. She's a frail young woman who is bound by custom. She is the daughter in law of the house and she has to take care of the entire household, including all the domestic chores. We also meet Mukesh's father, who is an impoverished bangle maker who has failed to renovate the house and could not send his sons to school. As we meet Mukesh's grandmother, we see how she has an unflinching belief in destiny, lineage, and tradition. She says it is his karam, his destiny. She also says, can a God given lineage ever be broken? As we meet these people and know more about them, we see that they have no desire or ability to question the status quo. It is as if they have accepted what they were born with. Mukesh's father says that all he has managed to do is teach his sons what he knows best, which is the art of bangle making. Which is to say that whatever he had learned from his father has been naturally passed on to his sons, and the grandmother fully supports this tradition. They cannot even think of moving out of this vicious circle. They cannot think of breaking the chain and moving out to do something else. We also meet young girls like Savita. Savita is a young girl in a drab pink dress who sits alongside an elderly woman soldering pieces of glass. She is one of those children who is actually taking the legacy forward, the legacy of bangle making. And notice how she is learning these skills mechanically. How such young children like Savita will ultimately lose their eyesight before they become adults. And we know this because we have the elderly talking about their lives and explaining all of this to us. We have this old woman and her husband who talk about the loss of eyesight and whose voices are drained of joy. They know nothing except bangles, and all that the husband of this old woman could do was to make a house for the family to live in. But notice that this person has turned blind because of this occupation. They do not have enough resources. The woman says, एक वक्त शेर भर खाना भी नहीं खाया. After putting in all that hard work and giving up on not only eyesight but also a dignified life. And at this point, the author wonders if he has achieved what many have failed in their lifetime. At least this person has a roof over his head. For several in Firozabad, even that is a far fetched possibility. As the narrator moves further, she meets a group of young men who echo the lament of their elders, who are no better than their previous generations. They are as stuck in this life as their elders were. These people, like Savita, the young children, and these young men, could be seen as located at one point of the spectrum, the other end of which is symbolized by the lives of the elderly. Ultimately, all the people living in Firozabad share the same fate. Little has moved with time, it seems, in Firozabad. Nothing has happened as far as social, political, or economic transformation is concerned. No government has made sure that the lives of these people improve. They are employed in a particular occupation which asks them to engage in mind numbing toil. And years of mind numbing toil have killed all initiative and the ability to dream. They no longer want to or have any ability to move out of the system. They see themselves as victims and they live such lives. They have fallen prey to a vicious cycle that had trapped their fathers and forefathers. This vicious cycle is oppressive and ensures that they live in subservience silently and unquestioningly. Also, there is no leader among them. There is absolute lack of guidance or vision which could actually tell them how to break away or why to break away from this system. These people lead a life of stasis, and it would be safe in such circumstances to state that the callousness of society and the apathy of political class is responsible for the sufferings of the poor. As these young men talk to the author, she notices how they talk endlessly in a spiral that moves from poverty that they are born in, apathy of the social and political class, greed of the privileged, and the injustice that as a result is meted out to them. If we analyze the world around Mukesh a little further and in a greater depth, we would find that the world around Mukesh is defined by two major elements. The first one is family. The family, which is not only struggling with poverty but is also a victim of stigma of caste. Because they are born in the caste of bangle makers, they have accepted it as their fate. They believe strongly in destiny and karma. The other element is the vicious circle, which includes sahukars or money lenders, middlemen or thekedars, policemen, the keepers of law, bureaucrats, the creators of law, and politicians, the leaders. All of these people are the privileged, power wielding authority. All of them, along with the elements defined under family, keep the lives of people like Mukesh under control, and they would never let the status quo to break down. They would never want any questions to their authority. They would forever want people like Mukesh to stay oppressed. The effect of such kind of a world is a baggage which cannot be put down. Look at the lines. Together they have imposed the baggage on the child that he cannot put down, which is to say that a child born in Firozabad does not have the capability or the requisite amount of freedom to put down the weight that the world defined by family and the vicious circle have imposed upon him collectively. And before the child is aware, the child accepts this burden or baggage as naturally as his previous generation did. Why? Because to do anything else would mean to dare, would mean to question hierarchy, authority, lineage, tradition. And daring is not a part of his growing up. Now, here we are not only talking about Mukesh, but several other children who are growing up in similar circumstances. Daring was never taught, questioning was never taught as a part of his growing up. And yet, the author senses a flash of that daring in Mukesh and feels cheered. And that exactly is the point which makes Mukesh different from the rest of the people. Mukesh says, I want to be a motor mechanic. And he says that he would walk to the garage. He insists that he would walk. Look at how the world of Mukesh is different from the world around him. He chooses to be different. He chooses not to succumb to his present conditions. He dares to dream. And he does so confidently, without hesitating, and looking straight into the eyes of the author. Not only that, he is willing to put in the required amount of effort to achieve his goals. He would like to break away from the orthodox and economically drained society like Firozabad, which would never give him any chance at social mobility. He has a resolution, he has a dream which he would like to fulfill. It is this that makes him not only different from the rest of the people living in his own community, but also from our first protagonist, Sahib. Sahib had succumbed to the pressures of earning a livelihood, while Mukesh, even as his circumstances are not very promising as well, would like to fulfill his dreams. At this point, the author puts up the last question and asks, do you also dream of flying a plane? But at this point in time, Mukesh feels embarrassed. And this is a comment on the limitations of dreams in a socio-economically limited place like Firozabad, where people, no matter how spirited, can still not go beyond a particular point. Few airplanes fly over Firozabad. It is as if the airspace itself is marginalized for people living in societies like Firozabad. In this particular slide, I have created a table for you to fill. This is a little do-it-yourself exercise based on the comparative study of the two texts we have just discussed. You would have noticed that there are a few similarities as well as differences in Sahib's and Mukesh's story. I have here enlisted a few parameters starting from title, moving on to setting, then details of family, living conditions, occupation, working conditions, dreams, life defining factors, and the efforts made. What you have to do is you need to read the text one more time, watch the video one more time, try to look at the notes as well, and revise the text. As you revise, it would become easier for you to summarize the text in this particular table. You may or may not use a table, you may write paragraphs and paragraphs, but you should at least know how they are similar and different. Given here is a list of quotable textual phrases or lines. The page numbers have also been mentioned for your convenience. All of these lines have already been discussed. It is for your reference, especially for short and long answer type questions. And here we have a list of quick revision questions. Most of them are very short answer type questions. They are meant for your revision. Please go over them along with the questions which are given under Think as you read in your textbook. Try to attempt as many questions as possible to comprehend the text in a better manner. Happy learning!